Welcome to everyone joining this self-knowledge course. Today we will study topic number 32, entitled Radical Change. The purpose of this conference is to understand how to bring about a true radical transformation within ourselves. This transformation is not superficial. It is gradual but lasting because it reaches the very roots of our being. Often, we try to improve our lives by changing external circumstances. Yet, time and again, we see that this does not really work, and we remain unsure of how to change in a profound way. Today, we will learn what makes real change possible, and what tool will help us achieve it. When we talk about radical change, we are referring to something very different from the superficial adjustments we usually attempt, or even succeed in making. Radical change means finding the very cause of what we want to change and eliminating it at its root, so that the transformation is real and lasting. Many times we think that by giving up a habit or vice, or by promising ourselves never to repeat a mistake after suffering its consequences, we have changed. But this is not true. If we do not learn to discover and remove the underlying cause of the error, examining every detail, understanding each aspect, and eliminating them, we are only repressing that negative tendency inside us. And repression is like a time bomb. Sooner or later it will explode again, and when it does, it often comes back with even greater force. Let's begin by reflecting on this phrase, which points directly to the main reason why real change seems so difficult. As long as a man continues with the error of believing himself one unique individual, it is evident that radical change will be more than impossible. Let's take a closer look at this. Because we are so identified with our physical body and with the personality we have built in this lifetime, we fall into the illusion of believing that we are one fixed individual. We think we have a defined way of being. I am a good person. I am honest. I am shy. I am extroverted. By saying I am like this, we close the door to real transformation. This belief becomes our first obstacle because it prevents us from recognizing our true condition, that within us, we are not one, but many. Inside us exists a multiplicity of selves, or I's. Each one thinks, feels, and acts in its own particular way. When we are happy, we do not think, feel, or act the same as when we are sad, angry, or afraid. When we are in love, we do not behave as we do when we feel hatred or jealousy. When we are with people we want to impress, we do not act as we do when we are with those we trust completely. So, whenever we say I am like this, we are really identifying with only one of our many I's. Within us live countless psychological defects and tendencies, some that appear good, others that appear bad. Take, for example, the alcoholic I. Even if we do not drink, perhaps because of upbringing, personal choice, or convenience, that defect may still exist within us. In that case, it hides under its opposite, the abstemious I. But abstinence, when it is only repression, is not a virtue. The abstemious I often criticizes, rejects, or even despises the alcoholic. Why? Because it has not truly understood or dissolved the alcoholic tendency within itself. It has only pushed it down into the unconscious. That is not wisdom. It is simply the passive pole of the same defect, and so it is with all our inner defects. Each moves in duality, active and passive, good and bad. All of them, without exception, keep a part of our consciousness trapped. Real change begins only when we learn to identify these tendencies, observe them in action, comprehend them deeply, and finally eliminate them from within. Only then can we free the fragments of consciousness imprisoned in lust, anger, gossip, laziness, greed, envy, pride, and all the rest. When this process is complete, we will no longer be a divided multitude of I's. We will no longer live through contradictions and opposites. We will simply be consciousness. And in that state, only then will we truly become one. The inner work begins with rigorous self-observation, because self-observation is the very foundation of self-knowledge. Without observing ourselves, we will never discover our inner reality, who we truly are. If we do not learn to observe, we will remain blind to the fact that we need a profound, radical transformation. That is why the first step toward radical change is hidden from those who still believe themselves to be one. The only way to recognize that we are not one, but many, is through relentless self-observation. Honest, direct, and without excuses or escapes. If we sincerely observe ourselves throughout just one day, watching how we think, feel, and act, we will quickly notice how often we change. In a short span of time, our mood, our behavior, and even our way of speaking shift again and again. Our body, in truth, is nothing more than a vehicle. It is a human machine used by our many psychological defects. These defects come and go, each taking control for a while. At present, we are like puppets, pulled by countless strings. Inside, our defects fight among themselves, each one trying to dominate the machine. And because every ego seeks only its own interest, the result is inner chaos. Anger only wants to harm, mistreat, or even destroy, even if it costs the physical body. Lust only wants to satisfy its impulses, to indulge in pleasure, adultery, and desire. Greed only wants to hoard, to possess, and then waste according to its whim. Sadness only wants to suffer, complain, and sink into regret. And so it is with every defect. Each one seeks nothing but the satisfaction of its own egoic craving. If we do not become conscious of this inner multiplicity, we will never be able to change. Radical change begins the moment we start to observe ourselves, truly, continuously, and in every moment. When we are in a state of self-observation, we remain attentive to what is happening in our energy centers at all times, especially in the 5 lower centers, the motor, intellectual, emotional, instinctive, and sexual centers. These centers are fallen, unbalanced, and are constantly being used by our psychological defects. This is vital to understand because if we don't observe the manifestation of a defect, we cannot eliminate it. It is impossible to remove an error we do not even recognize. That is why the first step is to observe what we want to free ourselves from in our psyche. For example, imagine you are scrolling through social media and suddenly see something of a sexual nature. If you are attentive, you can observe how your sexual center is activated as certain eyes of lust immediately try to take control. In another moment, you may feel anxiety in the instinctive center. By observing carefully, you might discover that this anxiety comes from a defect that wants to smoke, or perhaps an eye of infidelity that urges you to betray your partner. At other times, the same anxiety may be caused by an eye of fear or uncertainty about something in the future. In the emotional center, we can discover many expressions. If we are near someone we are attracted to, we might notice the activity of sentimental and lustful defects, recklessly wasting our energy. Other times, we may detect emotions of resentment, sadness, or bitterness manifesting there. In the intellectual center, we can observe how sometimes the defect of worry invades the mind, filling it with negative, restless thoughts. In the motor center, we can notice defects using our energy through words, for example, when insulting others, or through sight when we look at someone with lust. These are only a few simple examples of what we can discover in ourselves if we practice constant self-observation. If we truly want change, we must be willing at every moment to discover, observe, and eventually eliminate the defects that arise within us. Let's take a very ordinary example, standing in a long line at the bank. If we observe ourselves in that moment, we will notice many defects appearing: laziness, impatience, intolerance. Emotionally, we feel immediate displeasure at having to wait. Mentally, we see complaints and criticism flooding our thoughts. Instinctively, we notice anxiety and agitation rising. In the motor center, we observe laziness trying to make us lean on something, or nervous tics like shaking our foot or biting our nails. Even in the sexual center, we might notice subtle tension, because many of those repetitive nervous movements are connected to the same energy of masturbation, where the body unconsciously seeks a small release of pleasure to calm anxiety. In just this one simple situation, so many defects can be observed. And the same happens with every circumstance of daily life. By practicing observation, we also discover that each eye is not simple, but is made up of many details. We must remember, inner, radical change will never happen magically. It requires us to observe the manifestation of each detail of a defect, to comprehend it, and to eliminate it with the help of our Divine Mother within. Many times we try to create change by altering our external circumstances, believing that by doing so we will change within. We think that by switching partners, changing jobs, moving to another country, or even adopting a new religion, we will transform ourselves. But the truth is, no matter where we go, we carry with us all our psychological defects. And since it is those defects that shape our reality, we inevitably attract the same situations, the same kinds of people, and we repeat the same mistakes again and again. At other times, we seek inner change through self-help books, spiritual teachings, moral codes, or ethical systems. We look for transformation by following spiritual masters, attending courses, or even by listening to lectures like this one. But we forget that none of these things can change us on their own. Real work is not external, it is internal. Anyone who believes that a code of morality or a superficial ethical system will bring about true change is simply mistaken. Often, what we really want is someone to tell us what to do, so we can follow the rule, feel good, and avoid facing our own inner darkness. But all that does is force us to repress our defects in order to conform. Since those defects remain alive within us, they eventually resurface, and we fall into the same mistakes again. The fact that this work begins with self-observation should already make it clear. It requires a deeply personal effort. No one else can do this work for us. No one can save us from ourselves. No one can eliminate our psychological defects except us. Only when we take action, practicing self-observation and applying psychological depth, can we begin to verify true, radical changes within ourselves. And those inner changes are what truly transform our lives. Another point to keep in mind is this: it is not enough to simply accept the idea that we are many. It is easy to agree that we have different ways of being, or to find it logical when someone says we are not one but many. But if we stop there, without directly observing this inner multiplicity, without studying our psychological defects to understand and eliminate them, then we achieve nothing. We are only deceiving ourselves. No real change is possible in our psyche without the direct observation of the subjective elements we carry within. Only through disciplined, honest, and continuous self-observation, without escapes or justifications, can we verify for ourselves that we are not one, but many. And when we begin to observe ourselves in every moment with the sincere intention of changing, and when we work to eliminate each expression of the ego we discover in our centers, only then do we begin to create true, radical transformation within. Once we begin to observe ourselves in this way, we face a crucial distinction. Admitting the plurality of the ego and actually verifying it through rigorous observation are two very different things. What truly matters is that we decide to begin observing ourselves seriously so that we can confirm for ourselves what we are explaining here. If we do not work on ourselves, we will lose the opportunity for radical transformation that our real being is offering us by motivating us to receive these teachings. If, on the other hand, we accept that we have many defects, but postpone the change until we are in a better disposition, a better economic situation, or a better emotional state, then we will never achieve radical change. Avoiding the work of intimate observation, seeking constant evasion, is a clear sign of degeneration. As long as a person clings to the illusion that he is always one and the same, he cannot change. Yet the very purpose of this work is to bring about a gradual transformation of our inner life. If all we do with this information is to use the ego as an excuse for our bad actions, for example saying, "Yes, I act this way, but that is because I have that very strong defect," or "Yes, I must meditate on this defect," but then never actually doing it, this only reveals that we are very attached to the defect and have no real intention of changing. We deceive ourselves if we think we are changing simply by recognizing our defects. If we truly want change, it must begin here and now. We must start observing ourselves from this very moment, deciding that every detail of each defect we discover expressing through our centers will be observed, judged, and eliminated. We must stop being complacent with our psychological defects, stop being permissive with them, and stop allowing them to control our body. If what we are discussing today remains only theory, it is useless. This teaching will only serve us if we apply it and verify it for ourselves. What truly matters is evidencing, experiencing, and comprehending. Only in this way can we work consciously to bring about radical change. We begin to see this reality when, through self-observation, we discover the presence of specific psychological defects. For example, by observing ourselves, we may realize that lust is the very defect that prevents us from conserving our sexual energy. The experience of change begins when we dedicate ourselves to observing the many details that make up that defect and to eliminating them one by one. Take lust, for instance. To free ourselves from it, we must eliminate the instinctive sensations that drive us to waste energy. We must eliminate the emotions of pleasure or displeasure that cause us to lose energy, as well as the sentimentality, mental concepts, and mechanical imagination that flood our mind with lustful images. We must eliminate lustful desires, the habit of wasting energy through masturbation or through ordinary sexual activity, the anxiety, the compulsive actions, every detail that forms part of this defect. As we observe and eliminate these details, asking our Divine Mother to dissolve them, we begin to experience liberation. From this comes comprehension. In this case, the deep understanding of the value of our sexual energy and the power of chastity. As we become more conscious of our inner multiplicity, and as we begin to experience the transformation that arises from understanding and eliminating our negative ways of being, our consciousness awakens and true self-knowledge begins. This experience is what we referred to in the meditation lecture as the taste of the work. Each day, each situation gives us the opportunity to work on ourselves and to improve. How do we know when we have truly understood one of our psychological defects? When it no longer controls us, when we no longer react as we once did, when it no longer disturbs us or makes us suffer. That is when we cease to be slaves to that defect. Even more, we know we have comprehended it when seeing others under the influence of that same defect. We no longer judge or criticize them because we have already rescued the wisdom, the light, the consciousness that the defect had trapped. In this way, step by step, as we advance in this inner work, we bring about a truly radical change within ourselves. We must understand that affirming is one thing and comprehending is another. Anyone can speak at length about psychological death, liberation, or enlightenment without ever having experienced them. Without the work of self-observation and the elimination of defects, such words remain empty, vain, and ambiguous. It is not enough to simply listen to these teachings and affirm that they are true. What we need is comprehension. To know and to comprehend are very different. Knowing belongs to the mind, while comprehension arises from the heart. The comprehension of our defects is not something that will come from the intellect, but from the heart. Knowing is based on theories and concepts. For example, we may know the methods for psychological death, for spiritual birth, for meditation, or for astral projection. We may study them, read books, or even talk about them. Yet all that knowledge is useless if it remains only in the mind. Comprehension is different. It is born from practice, from direct experience, and verification. When we apply the teaching and see its result, wisdom awakens in us, and true comprehension comes to the heart. All real change must go through this process of comprehension. If we try to change our actions, habits, or customs without understanding the psychological defects behind them, we will inevitably return to the same old patterns. Therefore, if we want radical change, it must always be based on comprehension, on directly observing and eliminating the details that make up our negative ways of being. Otherwise, frustration will be the only outcome. There are certain defects that we must prioritize and confront from the very beginning of this work, because they directly damage our sexual creative energy. These defects reverse the creative power of our energy, causing it to be expelled. In doing so, they revive the very psychological defects we have already eliminated, and even create new ones. By falling into these three defects, all progress in psychological death is undone, and it becomes impossible to achieve chastity. The three are fornication, alcohol consumption, and drug use. Fornication is the loss of sexual energy through ejaculation and orgasm, whether during sexual relations with a partner, through masturbation, or through nocturnal emissions. Every time we lose our sexual energy, old defects are revived and new ones are created, since fornication is the very channel through which all the defects we carry within us were formed. That is why, from the very beginning, we must be radical with everything that leads us to fornication, pornography, masturbation, adultery, and so forth. We must also be radical with drugs and alcohol, substances such as cocaine, heroin, crack, as well as so-called mystical drugs like ayahuasca, peyote, hallucinogenic mushrooms, marijuana, and also alcohol all revive dead defects. They do this because they fundamentally alter sexual energy, just as we studied in Lecture 14. If we truly want to awaken our consciousness, we must be uncompromising with these 3 defects from the very start. When a person begins to carefully observe himself, realizing that he is not one, but many, he has begun serious work on his inner nature. To achieve real change within ourselves, we must learn to be radical. For the new to be born, the old must die. And this has been today's conference. I hope it will serve you well in your inner work. Thank you very much to all who are participating in these conferences. I wish you strength in your inner work and much success in your awakening. I also invite you to the next conference, where we will study 2 very important laws, the law of octaves and the law of entropy. We will see how these 2 laws operate, how to use the law of musical octaves to rise in our inner work, and how to counteract entropy to avoid descending on the path of self-realization. Thank you once again. Do not hesitate to send us your questions. Until next time.